And on behalf of our staff, I welcome you this evening. Thank you for coming out. So I'm going to introduce you now to Francis, who's the Executive Director of Visual Communications. He's carrying on the spirit of VC today, which is very inspiring because he carries on that spirit of our former staff people like Linda Mabalit and Steve Tatsukawa, and so fills me with hope for the future that we have Francis at the leadership of VC. So Francis, big hand for Francis.
Thank you, John, for that. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Refractions, tonight's public programming highlighting a current exhibit at the museum titled At First Light, The Dawning of Asian America. This exhibition draws from hundreds and thousands of photographs and hundreds of videos from the VC archive. So imagine sort of the work that happened with our founders, with Eddie, with Bob, with Karen, Dwayne, and everybody else to sort of curate this. So really powerful exhibit that chronicles the transformation of the Asian Pacific American political identity that rejected racist stereotypes, stood for human rights, recovered lost histories, and created new cultural expression. So, so if you have not seen it, please, again, please come back and experience it. I'd like to thank the Japanese American National Museum, the staff and board, for your continued partnership with Visual Communications for making this exhibit happen. Thank you for our supporters at First Light. Our gratitude to the Aratani Foundation for your support of our VC archives and our annual programs. Thank you for the California Arts Council, California Wellness Foundation, and their VC members and community partners and allies. Some of the reflections that At First Light are images and videos that look to refract and inspire to, as always. I also would like to give our collective love and light to Dean Matsubayashi for their support, belief, and partnership. Your work will continue to be reflected today, tonight, and will continue to inspire tomorrow and the future. Folks, I'd like to bring up Abraham Ferrer to talk about the program that he curated for you for this evening. Please welcome Abe Ferrer.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for showing up on a Thursday evening for this special program. John Isaki mentions his arrival, to visual communications as being, basically like a late breakfast. If that's so, then I came to visual communications around lunchtime. So, that still is a long time. But in any event. This program actually was the brainchild of a couple of people, Eddie Wong and Amy Uyematsu, and they were both inspired by a New York Times article that Eddie came across a few months ago, in which the Times was digging through its photo archive, and they invited 10 people who were writers to come in from outside and rummage through their archive and select an image that they were inspired to write about. And so, they basically came up with a written piece of prose for each one of them, and it ran in the Times and stuff. So riffing off of that and riffing off of the idea of the photographic archive, not as a musty place where basically images go to die, but one in which we look to activate the experiences and the range of expression that are contained in each and every single one of them. We, in turn, invited 10 friends of ours who are literary artists to experience the At First Light exhibit and select an image from that exhibit up right now that really inspired them or moved them to, to think about life in a particular way. And they came up with a piece of written work that they are going to be world premiering with to you tonight, accompanied behind me by the images that they selected. In a way, this is going to be a really, really special program because even before cinema, even before media arts, even before visual arts, it's my thought that the Asian American movement and the artistic impulses that drove it really were jump-started by the work of the literary artists and the writers, from people ranging from Carlos Bulasson to to Amy Uyematsu, to even, people like Don Nakanishi, the first editor of the Amnesia Journal, and a whole bunch of other people who I'm kind of like totally like, brain farting and just like forgetting right now. But believe me when I say that, those people were really, really pioneers, and it's almost like bringing, this whole experience full circle, because it's literary artists, who in part inspired a lot of the creative expression in the movement, and it goes, back in a circle and stuff. And so we're really, really, gratified to, to have you here and have these artists with us tonight. I'm going to go ahead and go upstairs, and I'm going to basically be running the show for the rest of the evening. To host this evening is a young man that many of you may know, but back in 2009, he was one of 4 interns at Visual Communications who, among other things, helped us restore some order to a large component of our photographic archive. And we also remember him fondly as the person who introduced the random word generator as a device to title all of our fundraising and screening events and what have you. So if you go back in history and see some of these really weird titles for some of our screening events and what have you, that's all him. You may know him these days as the producer and lead curator of on Tuesday Night Cafe, but to us, like, he's a visual communications homie from a long way back. So ladies and gentlemen, why don't you help me in welcoming to the stage to be hosting this evening, Sean Mura.
Can you please give it up for Abe, the man? All right, so I'm gonna try to keep my role relatively slim tonight. So I'm just gonna read instead of going off the handle like I normally do. But welcome, my name is Sean Mura. Thank you for joining us here tonight at the Japanese American National Museum for tonight's program, Reflections, Refractions. Community organizer, thinker, and mentor Grizzly Boggs leaves us with a few words I'd like to share to open the evening. They go, history is not the past, it is the stories we tell about the past. How we tell these stories, triumphantly or self-critically, metaphysically or dialectically, has a lot to do with whether we cut short or advance our evolution as human beings. As Abe mentioned earlier, tonight 9 writers and 2 musicians will interact directly with the past and spin history themselves, exploring story in conversation with the original founders and core VC staff from over the years. Each writer or musician has chosen a piece from the At First Sight exhibition and will perform an original composition in response. Through this process, we build new understandings of history and new ways of thinking about the future. The VC archive becomes not just a resource, but a live interactive lens we can utilize in considering, in Boggs' words, our evolution as human beings. A quick program note, unfortunately, Koji Sakai has had a family matter that he has to attend to and will not be joining us this evening. He sends his regrets. But with that, I would like to get the evening started. So I'd like to first off kick off with Taiji Miyagawa. Taiji Miyagawa has collaborated with Asian American artists, including the late composer and pianist Glenn Horiuchi, the band Hiroshima, Philip Kangotanda, Lawson Inada, and Nobuko Miyamoto. He is currently the bassist for the Crenshaw-based quartet Los Acatombros. Please give it up for Taiji Miyagawa. Amy Uyematsu is a Sansei and third-generation Angelino. She was active during the early years of the Asian American movement and co-edited Roots, an Asian American reader. She's published 5 collections of poetry, including her most recent book, Basic Vocabulary. Amy teaches a writing workshop at the Far East Lounge in J-Town. Now retired, she taught high school math for LAUSD for 32 years. Before her piece, a quick clip.
Fresno's grown. The new businesses lit for blastoff. I told you so, oh yes. You get off where it tells you, west side. I told you so, oh yes. It's already blasted off by the laws of progress, by the cause of commercial parks. I told you so, oh yes. Tore out most of winos dark. I told you so, oh yes. You take your old name back, Chano. I told you so, oh yes, Chano. And stamp it on the back of your hand. I told you so, oh yes. You did it all over yourselves, on all the walls you knew. I told you so, oh yes. That must have told you something. I told you so, oh yes. Looking good, Jim. I told you so, oh yes. ¿Qué tal, vato? I told you so, oh yes. I mean, you know ese. I told you so, oh yes. Side pockets high, ways and means gliding down, nodding, clean, neon. I told you so, oh yes. Get it? I told you so, oh yes. I mean, you got it, Jack. Orale pues ese vineyard. Thick, menudo, noodles, chopped stick, stem, cotton, mama, thick, heavy, dust, breeze. I mean, I told you so, oh yes. Sweat, temples, mosques, shine parlors, Jim. I mean, you got it. Chambada, mariachi, funky, armpit blues. I told you so, oh yes. Blow, blow, blow.
Amy is unable to join us this evening, unfortunately, so reading in her place, please welcome back to the stage Taiji Miyagawa.
Dear Lawson, after seeing I Told You So, Alan Kondo's 1974 film on Lawson Inada, did you know you were the very first poet I ever heard? Round about 1970, UCLA. Early guest speaker in Asian American Studies. You were one of us. Angry, young, militant, and yet you weren't. You talked the talk, but only like a poet who plays upright bass and loves straight-ahead jazz. Man, you sure knew how to riff. With a bebop ear, you embraced yellow power, too, ranting about the EHW, external honkies of the world, or proclaiming, wake up, we are King Kong over this world. We are King Kong over this world, and sing, think yellow. You even gave us homework with poems using loaded words like media, Asian, identity. I went home and did just that. Been writing poems ever since. The first poetry book I bought was before the war, just $5. Its dust jacket, torn from so much use, pictures you on the back, serious, wearing your signature beret as you sit in front of a sign demanding Fresno needs a progressive leader. Still in my early 20s, I had a major crush on Toshiro Mifune. But Lawson, you were the hero that changed me. Just last month, I saw you for the first time on a film in I Told You So. Hope you don't mind my saying, there's a bit of gangsta strut as you walk the sidewalks of downtown Fresno. Cool as ever in your turtleneck, wool cap, slightly flared denims, looking at old West Side signs, Nisei Barbershop, Azteca, El Gato Negro Cafe, walls filled with neighborhood graffiti and Chicano murals singing, I told you so, oh yes, I told you so, oh yes. Your poems salute so many jazz greats like Mingus, Coltrane, Parker, Monk. You even got Billie Holiday's autograph when you were 18 and tell us it was around that time you began writing poetry. Then start the music playing, thick jazz, strong jazz, and notice that the figure comes to life, sweating, growling over an imaginary bass. My friend Taiji, who also plays double bass, says he hears jazz whenever you perform. But what the name Lhasa Inada means most to me is all you've written about the concentration camps and our history as Japanese Americans. Just a Sansei kid in Aurora and Amachi, you depict our unjust imprisonment with wisdom and outrage, unblinking and undeniable truths. Mud in the barracks, a muddy room, a chamber pot. Mud in the moats around each barracks group. Mud on the shoes, trudging to the mess hall. And I suspect you're addressing a lot of us movement, Sansei, when you write. People ask, why didn't you protest? Well, you might say they had hostages. You so rightly attest. And the people made poetry from camp, and the people made poetry in camp. Yes, the people made poetry, our determination to create beauty in defiance of barbed wire jails, so much art and artifacts made with hands and hearts, the bonsai gardens, wood carvings, sketches and paintings, furniture, tankas, jewelry, using whatever we could find. I told you so, oh yes, I told you so. Thank you, Lawson, for celebrating men like Yosh Kuromiya, Heart Mountain draft resistor, arrested, judged, sentenced, imprisoned for refusing induction. Back in the day, do you remember a lot of us carried Mao's little red book, espoused the idea of art for the people? Well, your poetry comes from exactly that place, our Issei and Nisei roots, the camps, a uniquely American history of struggle and resistance. No wonder so many of us have grown from your words. And as we used to sign off, Lawson, all power.
Teresa Mei Chuc. Poet laureate of Altadena, Teresa Mei Chuc is the author of 3 full-length collections of poetry, Red Thread, Keeper of the Winds, and Invisible Light. She was born in Saigon, Vietnam, and immigrated to the U.S. under political asylum with her mother and brother shortly after the Vietnam War, while her father remained in a Viet Cong re-education camp for 9 years. Her poetry appears in journals such as Consequence Magazine, Kyoto Journal, the National Poetry Review, Rattle, and in anthologies such as The New Poets of the American West and Inheriting the War, Poetry and Prose by Descendants of the Vietnam Veterans and Refugees. Teresa is a graduate of the Masters in Fine Arts and Creative Writing program at Goddard College in Plainsfield, Vermont, and teaches literature and writing at a public high school in Los Angeles. Please give it up for Teresa Mei Chuc.
On the other side of the ocean. You didn't know it then because what you did was for future generations like me. You taught me a valuable lesson. If we try, we could stop a war. You taught me that there are people far away that we could fight for here. That our physical bodies could be a barrier to violence against humanity. That when we stand on the street with signs, walk out of university classrooms in protest, walk down the streets of Tokyo town, burning the flags of imperialism, march on Wilshire Boulevard against the war in Vietnam. As we rally in the sun while our sisters and brothers are sleepless, under moonlight, surrounded by rice fields and the sound of bombs, when we refuse a corrupt system that needs us more than we need it, and remember what we still have, to fall backwards with our eyes closed into the misty clouds of time, love, integrity, compassion, community, catching us with her open arms. Thank you.
Naomi Hirahara. Naomi Hirahara is an Edgar Award-winning mystery novelist, social historian, and writer of nonfiction books on the Japanese-American experience. A former editor of the Rafushinpo newspaper, she most recently co-wrote Terminal Island, Lost Communities of Los Angeles Harbor, and Life After Manzanar. Her Mas Arai mystery series, which ended with the Edgar-nominated Hiroshima Boy last year, have been translated into Japanese, Korean, and French. The first, Summer of the Big Bachi, is currently being developed into an independent feature film. She is also the writer of the Officer Ellie Rush Mysteries, a middle grade novel, 1001 Cranes, and a new mystery set in Hawaii, Iced in Paradise, which will be released in September 2019. Please give it up for Naomi Hirahara.
Super 8, an ode to the Allen Hotel. George claimed he owned the joint. Eviction notice ignored. His roommates and only friends, the centerfolds pasted on windows and walls alongside 99-cent store bags. The mystery man wouldn't open his door at first. To the reporters in the darkened hallway, electricity had been cut off long ago, then a crack, a pile of a life topped with a brown banana skin. He mumbles about Pearl Harbor. The Allen took them all in, battered and bedraggled, and in the 80s, the Second Street developer spit them out. Charles left, and so did Saburo. Ricky and Louis went, leaving the ones who didn't know the thin line between reality and nightmares. A lawyer arrives with a flatbed truck, pulling away George and Nameless in wheelchairs, depositing them on Skid Row. It was business. It was legal. Death of the Allen Hotel. In the passing traffic, a whirl. Load the cartridge, shoot and aim. Louis was jumped on Skid Row, now lives in his rundown station wagon, moving it from one side of the street to the other in Chinatown. Ricky is selling his blood, the same that fought in the Korean War. His home is the Chester Hotel. He has it better than most. Super 8 is not a savior, but it's a truth teller, grainy and flawed. I am an amateur, but with DP Chop we try not to forget the demise happening before our eyes. Grab that iPhone, the Android, the old Super 8, slice and dice. It's not pretty, the audio skips. How did this happen? 50,000 homeless, one apartment at a time. Eyesores, we said. They held rooms of lives, hard-fought and scarred. Saburo and Charles don't walk the streets of Little Tokyo anymore. Yet I hear Saburo's slight stutter, see his shaven head in a beanie. Charles' sly smile, like we're in on a joke that I didn't know at the time. Press the button to record. We see, but we don't see. Adjust the lens.
Miya Iwataki helped build Serve the People programs inspired by the Black Panther Party with Japanese American Community Services, Asian involvement in Little Tokyo, the first Asian movement center while living in a political collective in Boyle Heights. She was director of the first Asian Women's Center, a delegate to UN Decade for Women's Convention in Nairobi, Kenya, sponsored by United Nations NGO, and fought for redress and reparations with NCRR, Nikkei for Civil Rights and Redress. Poet, writer, KPFK radio host, Rafushinpo columnist, her life experiences have informed her cultural and political activism. She is currently working to preserve the legacy and cultural soul of Little Tokyo in the face of gentrification. Please welcome to the stage Miya Iwataki.
Spirit of the 60s and 70s, a prose poem. This was the 60s and 70s, a vibrant era teeming with music and movements. Martin Luther King had a dream. Malcolm X had a message to the grassroots. This was the age of protest. Women burned bras, young men burned draft cards, anti-war protesters burned the flag, and the inner cities burned in rebellion. This, the age of Aquarius. Hippies turned on, tuned in, and tuned out, wandering through Woodstock in a purple haze of crystal blue persuasion. This, the era of social change, where a people's movement mobilized and marched against racism, leading the fight to win civil rights in '64. This, the age of liberation, we women stood up, spoke out, took back the night, appropriated our bodies and ourselves, searing our way into history and sisterhood. This was the era of great heights. JFK asked not what our country could do for us, but what we could do for our country, and we did. And John Glenn became the first man to walk on the moon while the whole world watched. And the whole world watched as 23,000 Chicago police rioted against protesters at the 1968 Democratic National Convention, and watched again at Kent State in May 1970 as National Guards opened fire, killing 4 unarmed student protesters, and we marched. It was an era of assassinations. President John F. Kennedy, November 22, 1964, motorcade, Dallas, Texas. Malcolm X, February 21, 1964, the Audubon Ballroom, New York. Reverend Martin Luther King, April 4, 1968, the Lorraine Hotel, Memphis, Tennessee. Bobby Kennedy, June 6, 1968, the Ambassador Hotel, Los Angeles. And we marched. It was an age of revolution and third world liberation struggles and armies of freedom fighters rising from poverty to liberate their people, and we marched. And there was a war in Vietnam, when a small country stood up to the most powerful nation in the world in a war that changed the culture of America, and we marched. We, the invisible minority. We, the checkbox marked other. We, the quiet Americans. We, the gardeners, housekeepers, farmers, sewing workers. We, gentle geishas. We, sexy Susie Wongs. We, hard workers pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. We, Orientals in the eyes of Occidentals. We, the model minority. We stood up to break our silence, to reclaim our history, to honor our people, to shatter boundaries of race, age, gender, class, to stand with our communities struggling for justice, to embrace the spirit of internationalism, to end the war in Vietnam, a war against Asian people, and by our presence, taking the struggle beyond, bring our boys back home, to Asian Lives Matter. We marched in our community in the Nisei Week Parade under the banner of the Van Troy Anti-Imperialist Youth Brigade. Go left, go right, go pick up the gun. In formation, go left, go right, go pick up the gun. In memory of Nguyen Van Troy, who gave his life to try to end the war. Simultaneously, on a balcony of the Sumitomo building, slipping by security to shower anti-war leaflets into the crowd below, in the spirit of Tai Bin, we marched. Dr. Martin Luther King had a dream where Black lives mattered, Muslim lives mattered, Asian lives mattered, the people mattered, and we dreamed and won justice and redress. Malcolm X had a message to the grassroots. We share that message and the fighting spirit of the 60s and 70s in the memory of Sei Fuji, Medgar Evers, Cesar Chavez, from Greensboro to Charlottesville to El Paso, from Wounded Knee to Standing Rock, from Little Tokyo anti-eviction to Little Tokyo anti-gentrification, from Manzanar and Tule Lake to Fort Sill. And for many, it began in Little Tokyo, the cultural soul of the Japanese American community. Let the spirit of the 60s and 70s continue to inspire us. All power to the people.
Kenji Liu is author of Monsters I Have Been and Map of an Onion, national winner of the 2015 Hillary Gravendike Poetry Prize. His writing has appeared in American Poetry Review, Poetry Northwest, Gulf Coast, Apogee, and elsewhere, including 2 chapbooks and several anthologies. An alumnus of Kundiman Vona Voices and TRACI Resident Artist Program and their community of writers, he lives in occupied Tongva land. Please welcome to the stage Kenji Liu.
Letter to San Pedro at First Street, 1972. Red Star, I believe in you. You want to do something against everything. And star, your points ignite the night. With incandescent argument, like you, a gardenia believes in nights, long and warm, and it's summer again, always. And star, the charred footprints of our official state animal indicate that wildfires will dislocate our parade. A skyline of flames will rise and fall as singed deer and foxes dance along First Street in burnt yukata, while banks perch, waiting for what they always wait for. 6 white cops will go to the parade and stray their eyes. The Asian cop will disengage and wander the stars, and all will rest in the distortion of safety known as a gun. Star, the hole you left in the sky is filled with measuring eyes. Remind me what and who forgetting serves. A national flag makes it easy. We turn our stars over to it. Star, you remind me of someone I will forget. I will be that young too. As the block disappears, building by building, white petals open where each person stands, metallic flowers burst, and we will miss the night when brightness comes to burn a photo of you.
Stan Yogi is co-author of the award-winning books Fred Korematsu Speaks Up and Wherever There's a Fight, How Runaway Slaves, Suffragists, Immigrants, Strikers, and Poets Shaped Civil Liberties in California. He is the co-editor of 2 books, Highway 99, A Literary Journey Through California's Great Central Valley and Asian American Literature, and Annotated Bibliography. Please welcome to the stage Stan Yogi.
Thanks for joining us tonight. My piece is entitled, Hagujin Equals American, Orientals Equals Us. When you were 9, you watched Kung Fu every Thursday night on Channel 7. Your aunt pulled a Celeste pizza out of the freezer and put it in the oven 30 minutes before your piano lesson ended, so that it would be ready when you walked across the street from the house of your teacher, Mrs. Suyama, to your aunt's home. You arrived just in time to watch the opening credits and fall into a royal blue beanbag chair next to your cousin, who handed you a paper plate with 2 slices of pizza. Your aunt and your mother joined you and your cousin in front of the big Sony television set to follow the adventures of Kwai Chang Caine, the itinerant Shaolin priest hero of Kung Fu. David Carradine must be Hapa, your cousin speculated, as she pondered the lead actor's heritage. He looks half. It's so hard for Orientals to make it in show business, your mother commented between slices of pizza. It's easier for happas, your aunt added sagely, especially if they look more American. Before Kung Fu, you had never seen so many people who looked like you on television. You knew, of course, about Sulu on Star Trek and Hop Sing on Bonanza reruns, but they weren't on every episode and were mostly in the background. There were Asians on Hawaii Five-0, but the leads were all Hagujin. Mrs. Livingston on The Courtship of Eddie's Father was closer to someone you might actually meet. You knew a few middle-aged Japanese immigrant women, like your neighbor, Chieko-san, who worked at the Daiwa factory around the corner from your house. But you didn't know any Japanese immigrants who were housekeepers for widowed fathers of kids your age. Kung Fu was filled with people who looked like you, at least in the flashbacks, set in the mysterious Shaolin monastery in China. But those characters' reality had nothing to do with yours. The placid Shaolin masters and their eager pupils lived in another century and might as well have lived in another galaxy like Sulu. You never saw anyone on television like your sister, whose best friend Reina was a waitress at Denny's. Reina and your sister would drive all the way to Venice on a school night just to eat chashu avocado burritos at Mago's. There were no characters on television like the Nisei ladies at the church your mother joined several months earlier after your father died. They spoke in tongues and lifted their arms to be filled with the Holy Spirit. You never saw men like the fathers of the boys on your Grey Y team, engineers who worked at TRW or car mechanics who had migrated from Kauai. You never expected your hometown ever to be mentioned on TV. So you, your mother, and your sister shrieked when you were watching an episode of Mannix, and Private Detective Joe Mannix announced that he was going to Gardena to follow a lead. In the following scene, kimono-clad waitresses glided in the background while Mannix conducted his interview. Even though you had never been there, you knew the restaurant in that Mannix episode had to be Kyoto Sukiyaki in the shopping center on Western Avenue, where your mother bought skimono at Spot Market, and where your friend's father ran Mori Jewelers. You had heard the waitresses at Kyoto Sukiyaki dressed in kimonos. It was a restaurant that your bachan called a high-tone place, which is probably why you never ate there. One night, on the drive home from your aunt's house, not long after you started watching Kung Fu, you collected the courage to ask your mother if your father left a note. She looked ahead at the darkened street. You thought she didn't hear you, but she glanced at you, turned her attention back to the road, and said, "No, he didn't." You continued in silence for a moment and then blurted out, "Why did he do it then?" Your mother paused again, let out an almost imperceptible sigh, and said, "I guess he just wasn't strong enough." She took a breath and added, "Life was too hard for him." You weren't sure if she meant your father wasn't physically capable of making it through life, like maybe he had a terminal illness he didn't want to burden your family with. As you tossed that idea around, fingering its edges in your mind, your mother pulled into your driveway. You both got out of the wood-paneled station wagon and walked into the house. The next day, after you ate the bologna sandwich your mother packed in a brown paper bag covered with "Have a nice day" happy faces, you and your friends acted out scenes from Kung Fu. "Take the pebble from my hand, grasshopper," you repeat to each other like the master on Kung Fu instructed a young Kwai Chang Caine. You hold out your hand with a small stone perched on your open palm before snapping your fingers closed. It was at least another year before you discovered Bruce Lee and glued his pictures all over your peachy school folders. He could kick Chuck Norris's ass, and even Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's. He was an Oriental who could defeat the Hagujin, and the Americans too. Thank you.
Eric C. Watt is the author of Swim, a novel about a drug-addicted gay Asian man planning his mother's funeral, and the making of a gay Asian community, an oral history of pre-AIDS Los Angeles. He is working on a community memoir of the AIDS movement in the API communities in Los Angeles, for which he received a research fellowship from the One National Gay and Lesbian Archives in 2018. Please welcome to the stage Eric C. Watt.
Thanks for being here. I wrote a short story and that I'm going to read. I'm not going to read the whole thing, the excerpt. The title is taken from a Johnny Cash song. P performed it in the prison, San Quentin. Actually, the song was written by Shel Silverstein, but he first performed it in the prison. The title is called A Boy Named Sue. I was supposed to be a boy. I'm the youngest of 4, another daughter after already 3. Before I came along, my family had already moved out of the overcrowded apartment in Chinatown. The economy was doing better, if only because both my parents had steady jobs. 3 jobs, to be exact, between the 2 of them, plus some odd ones here and there. They found a house for rent in Highland Park, a 4-bedroom at the corner of Marmion and Joy. Small bedrooms, but there were 4, enough for each of my sisters to have their own room. Still close to Chinatown, but far enough from those warrens, hidden behind restaurants and factories and village associations. Wider streets, more distance from the freeway, a standalone house, practically a suburb those days. They were feeling optimistic, so Pop wanted to try one more time for a boy. The luck ended there. He named me Susan. A year later, my mother fell ill and quickly died of a respiratory-related illness that her friends said she got from working in a garment factory. Their luck was fucked. In spite of all that, I had a happy childhood. Pop was overworked, so we could afford to stay in that house. Older sister worked part-time too at the McDonald's on Figueroa. She got the cooks to make extra burgers right before they closed that they were supposed to throw away at the end of the shift. That was our breakfast the next day. Second sister took care of me. I got to wear boys' clothes, hand-me-down from my cousins in the St. Gabriel Valley because they were closer in age to me than my third sister. I cut my hair when my neck could feel it, but I never did a good job. Second sister would fix it, and making it worse, she would just shave it all off. I rode my second-hand bike down the street in any of those little league jerseys from my cousins, the scarred pile. And the Chinese people in the neighborhood would call me Child Monk. When the boys played baseball in the street, I chased down the errant balls that they couldn't catch and threw them back as hard as I could. Needling the younger boys, their captain would say, "Get ready, Sue. I'm going to hit it so far that none of them can run it down." They loved me. I was supposed to be a boy. I was a boy. And then he got kicked out. I'm going to skip that part. And he got asked back many, many years later for the first time to the house when the family was getting evicted because the landlord decided to sell the house. So they asked him to come back and pick up stuff that he wanted to keep. So this is that section. So he's in his old room. My second sister has stored boxes of my stuff in the cobweb corner in the closet. In the first one, I find a series of proof sheets. I yell for my sister. She comes right away. "What's the matter?" "I think this is yours." "Hold on." She leaves the room only to return with a magnifying glass. A long time ago, she had taken up photography after a photojournalism class at LACC. She examines each frame on the first proof sheet. "Yes, I took these," she says, astounded. Who else could it be? Older sister even bought her a Kodak with manual exposure that was even older than me. She moves over and down with the magnifying glass like a snake. Then she hands me the magnifying glass. "But look who this is." I dived into the picture where she stopped. A boy was running down the pavement with a kite behind him, trying to get it to soar. His back to the camera, oblivious. I could tell by the street sign that read Marmion Way that it was the end of our block. He was in the moment. He owned the street. The boy was me. I moved down the proof sheet, same shot, in consecutive moments. I was in motion. The kite rose, up, until 8-9 frames later it disappeared. It's slowly coming back to me. The perfect lawn belonged to our neighbors, a gay couple. Double income, a long line of equity, and no kids, unless you consider they're Pomeranian. They say the gays come first and make the neighborhood tidy and safe for everyone else. Guess it's true, at least for the gays, not for queers like me. I ask, "Remember that couple next door who kept complaining about our fence, and they just gave up and eventually put up their own fence? What happened to them?" Them? They sold as soon as we bounced back from the recession. They made a bundle. I think they're living in one of those high-rises in Chinatown now. We both rolled our eyes at the same time, a small moment of solidarity. I'm definitely keeping these. They bring me joy. You were good at it. What happened? Cell phones, she says casually. But I know the truth. We happened. We all left her with our father, voluntarily or not. I buy dinner when brother-in-law comes home from work. I stroll down to Fidel's to pick up a pizza. At least Fidel's is still around. After dinner, I offer to stay overnight and to keep helping her sort things the next day. She's right. It's harder than I thought to leave the house. Thank you.
Irene Suico Soriano is an immigrant Filipino-American poet, independent literary curator, author of Primates from an Archipelago, and co-founder of the creative lab KATO-KIRIYAMA LA. She founded and coordinated the reading series Wrestling Tigers Asian Pacific American Writers Speak at JANM. She also participates in anti-vivisection activism because she believes in the fundamental rights of non-human animals to live their lives free from harm, pain, exploitation, and captivity. Please welcome to the stage Irene Suico Soriano.
Variations of Living. This poem is dedicated to my birth father, Francisco Suico, who is a Manong. Pedro always walked down Temple Boulevard in his dapper clothes and his signature fur felt Stetson fedora. This was the one habit he refused to give up when he moved to the United States from the Philippines. His younger compadres ribbed him about being so old-fashioned, dated, and behind the times. He would just roll his eyes and then laugh heartily. This Cebuano acquired his nickname Tata Pedro from the older Ilocano compatriots who welcomed him into their company. They were drawn to his laughter, and he gave so much of it for others to enjoy. With the limited amount of monthly SSI checks and monies accumulated from part-time jobs he would get, Pedro would indulge his minor pleasure once a year and on that trusted RTD Wilshire line from his Alvarado apartment, do the rare trek to his favorite haberdashery on Broadway between 6th and 7th Street. The nicer hats took a year or two to save for, but when he had enough, he always allowed himself the expense, which had now grown to a respectable collection of 5 hats. At the store, he knew to run his fingers across the soft brim, the wool felt, and make sure it included a shiny and unique silver Stetson pin. He warned others at the community hall they would congregate in. You were sold an unacceptable copy if it doesn't have that Stetson pin. There was a current fad that the other men got into. It was hand-woven straw hats with a pinch front. He avoided it because it reminded him too much of home. Sundays at the beach, the smell of humba and the sikwate that accompanied the puto his wife made fresh for their weekend trips. He missed those feelings, calm, contentment. Tata Pedro laughed at the limitations of these old men, fading memories, forgetting how they probably wore these styles a good 25 years ago. He enjoyed hearing them squawk about how the ladies who came to the hall preferred men who knew the latest fashions, and how the prettier ones would not hesitate to accept an invitation to dance, and perhaps even more. Putting on a hat was the first business of the day for Tata Pedro, and it never failed to remind him that the only time in his life he did not wear one was the day he buried his only son that died of consumption the eve of his 5th birthday. His wife died soon after, for there was no comfort even in your presence, she wrote on the back of their son's death certificate before she walked into the sea to find him. But that was over 15 years ago in a town called Mandaue, now a far memory. His now was Los Angeles, sharing a single apartment with Francisco, a compadre from Zamboanga del Sur he had met through his barber. They both agreed how quiet and lonely evenings could be in this, what would always be a new country. Pedro was hired part-time when the county museum opened its newest building. There were throngs of people, and he would always look through the crowd searching for faces of Filipinos that looked like they might be visiting from the Philippines. It was a glorious year. He had a small '84 Olympics poster he hung on the wall beside his transistor radio. The week the Mexican workers finished putting up the paintings that had been shipped all the way from France, Pedro came to work earlier than usual so he could walk through the empty exhibition halls and look at these works of art. He liked the vibrant colors, for they reminded him of the field and canyons he remembers growing up in the southwest portion of Cebu. He stood there and stared, self-soothed every time pangs of regret from his youth would take over. The buzzer that would signal all guards to stand by their posts would bring him back, and he would bustle to his corner. Tata Pedro was proud of his station. Month after month of looking and more looking, he noticed how the Filipino faces he searched out and would occasionally find never bothered to acknowledge him. He would look them in the eye and smile to initiate perhaps a greeting, but they would then take one look at him and would at once turn the other way or hurry through his section. He never quite understood why. One evening, jumping out from the black and white crackle of his little television screen was a figure of a man, brown like him, his same age, disconsolate, disclosing painful memories. I drowned my sorrows in alcohol, but my sorrows learned how to swim. A truth presented so simply, Pedro wept for hours until he fell asleep.
Traci KATO-KIRIYAMA is an award-winning artist, community organizer, and cultural producer, performer and principal writer of Pole Project Ensemble, director, co-founder of Tuesday Night Project, steering committee member of Vigilant Love, member of Nikkei Progressives, and Okaidi. Traci has been presented in hundreds of venues around the country, and their writing, community, and work appears through a wide variety of platforms, including NPR, PBS, C-SPAN, Elle.com, The Hollywood Reporter, Entropy, Regent Press, Heyday Books, Tia Chucha Press, Chaparral Canyon Press, and Writ Large Press. Please welcome to the stage Traci KATO-KIRIYAMA.
After Linda Mabalat, because of Linda Mabalat. This is for the old bloods, the post-young bloods, and the future bloods. Black and white photograph of Linda, surrounded by black and white photographs, in the old VC office, AKA JCCC room 309. Donning a blazer, made principally of linen and shoulder pad. Arm outstretched, moving images around the table, centering our histories in her gaze. Eyes on hidden treasure, smile steadfast in knowing. I stare at her picture, placed atop a pyramid of images on the gallery wall. I swear I hear her greeting penetrate the air. How's it? I remember a moment when I witnessed her power, long before I ever heard all the stories, of the pioneer who saved VC from vanishing, the earthy, magical visionary who hid at her desk a crystal ball in the form of a bottle of wild turkey or Jim Beam. Or much later, the ghost sage who dropped dimes in random places so we would remember to keep the change going. We were standing in the new office at Union Center. I asked some wide-eyed question about her vision, her plans. I'm looking ahead, she'd say. All the young bloods. Linda circled her finger past my gaze around the entire office. I see the future. I stared at her eyes. I wanted to see what she saw. She was only 49 when she died. She would be 66 today. I never gave her a proper thank you, or bought her a better bottle of bourbon, or made it out for a visit in those final weeks at the hospital. I often tell her thank you when I'm hanging out at VC these days. These days, we say goodbye too often to another and another, so many, too young, too much time, too much before their time, we say, gone far too young. I hang on to a thought that their energies come together to spread out further, and in their death we rise to the occasion of their vision. And maybe we move a little faster because we were a little too slow for them in their time with us here. And before one more passing, including my own, when I shout out to those who are gone from this place, when I give gratitude to Linda, I must say thanks to the ones she left behind on purpose, with purpose. To all those she left behind to keep us moving forward. Hand-plucked into community, hired on intuition, the puzzle pieces to Linda's memory, still here and holding in earthly excellence with names told to me like Cheryl, Kaz, Quentin, Jerome. Veterans still here, names like Susan, John, and Amy. The early Den Mama Cubs, names like Jeff, Callie, Kennedy, Maceo. I will never forget that she once spotted a fresh-faced Frances and how she armed us with a Leslie and was the spiritual spine behind a walking encyclopedia of Asian American cinema by the name of Abe. To the old bloods who still anchor the continuum, to the sibling young bloods, we have sailed well past our youth. To the future bloods who are pulling it all up and floating us forward, names like Asil, Tracy Ency, Josen, Kirby, Ashley, Sean. We mourn losses of the great, but I am remiss with their spirit to go another day without sending thank you notes to the living. 4,000 films and 105 billion frames later, I see you, or maybe I see the Linda in you. The room to which she pointed. Visionaries, one and all. A very full office surrounded by a building in the context of a community networked through the entire city in a web that stretches worldwide. I remember the words of that scratchy throat sage. She saw the future. She knew we'd be fine. I still stare at the still image of her eyes, but can finally see. She was right.
Don Magwili wrote and co-directed Much Adobo About Nothing, which was nominated for Best Independent Film for 2000 by A Magazine. He and his wife Sachiko created the musical A Jive Bomber's Christmas, which has been produced 10 times in 14 years, largely here at the Japanese American National Museum. This summer, he directed A Midsummer Night's Dream for the EWP Conservatory. He teaches Asian American film and video for the Department of Asian American Studies at Cal State Fullerton. Please welcome to the stage, Dom Magwili.
I go to First Street just to feel complete. I'm so happy I just follow my feet. I know there's secrets underneath my toes. I know there's answers if I follow my nose. I'm young forever, I hear the call. Give me a second, I'll remember it all. Ji-chan's not heavy, I can carry the weight. His life is heaven, his life is heaven, I won't let it go to fate. A time for life, a time for hate, a time for peace. No, it's not too late. I'm young forever. I hear the call. Give me a second, I'll remember it all. How was it cruising J-Town is for locals. How was it tending garden is astute. Pound the drum just to find your heartbeat. Stand your ground and then you speak your truth. Folks round here like to live in the light. Though they be kindly, don't think they won't fight. They still remember and they'll break the silence. Don't get them started, 'cause they'll march in defiance. They're young forever, they hear the call. Give me a second, I'll remember it all. They're young forever, they hear the call. Give me a second, I'll remember it all. So I teach at the Department of Asian American Studies at Cal State Fullerton. And I can tell you that there are stacks and stacks of books, summaries, and reports on historical contributions, psychological impact on American, Asian, Pacific, Islander, Desi American community, which is all of us here. And I can tell you that there are statistics and charts on health, population, and economic growth on that community. And that there are timetables and thumbnail sketches and biographies of the people in that community. And all this data, all this information is so that our kids can look into a mirror and not feel regret. So I am a teacher, and I look for ways to teach our young people that they are and have always been an important part of the American picture. And then I see this installation by Tad Nakamura, and I am grateful. I see the world through a lens. I write it down. I sketch the world that I see. I write it out graphically. I love what I see.
All right, everyone, that's the program for the evening. So I'd like to welcome back to the stage for a quick discussion Taiji Miyagawa, Teresa Mei Chuc, Naomi Hirahara, Miya Iwataki, Kenji Liu, Stan Yogi, Eric C. Watt, Irene Suico Soriano, TRACI KATO-KIRIYAMA, and Don Magwili. Please give them a round of applause. But if we can just go down the line and talk a little bit about how you came to the image that you picked. Just like a couple thoughts on why you picked the image or the artifact that you did.
It was hard for me to pick a single image because some of the images are really good. Really proud of the work that Bob, Eddie, and Dwayne did. I mean, a lot of us that have been associated with VC, we know what a gold mine that archives is, and those of us that worked in there, right, Sean, have been wanting the people to be able to see this stuff. And I think I'd like to say, can I say they did a great job? And so But in terms of the image I picked Mrs. Itabashi. Her and her husband used to teach the Japanese. It's kind of like batik, but the Japanese version, batik, out of the Sun Building. And when I got active in community work back in the late 70s, the Sun Building was about ready to get demolished for what was then going to be called the Otani Hotel. And that's where a lot of the cultural workers and social service agencies were in. Miya used to work out of a organization called JAX AI there. And Mrs. Itabashi, she's also on Tony Asumi's mural on Central Avenue. So if you look at that mural, she's on there. But she was a person I chose because she represented the older generation that was trying to carry on the traditions of our culture. And yet, at the same time, she understood how central that was to community, and she knew that the loss of the Sun Building was going to be an attack on our ability to preserve those cultures. And she became a pretty important activist in LT Pro, which is, by the way, was originally named by her husband, was given a Japanese name. So she was pretty inspirational, really a nice person. And she would speak at the rallies and try to talk to other people in the community to get support against the evictions and things like that. So that's why I chose her.
I participated in VC's Super 8 program in the 1980s. So when I just saw the equipment, that display, it just took me back. And yeah, so that's why I chose the Super 8 editor.
Well, the JAX Asian involvement that Taiji mentioned was kind of like the first movement, Asian movement center. And for some reason, I couldn't find photos of JAX AI, so I selected the Van Troy Anti-Imperialist Youth Brigade because to me, like the JAX Asian Involvement Office, it captured the exuberant, youthful spirit, the fighting spirit, and our movement principles and our stance against the war.
I sort of came of age creatively and politically in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and the image I picked of the young woman with the cops of the youth brigade reminded me of kind of the community organizing that I did in the Bay Area. And so, and I'm told that was Charlotte Murakami. And she just reminded me of so many of my young, Asian American female friends who were also equally as passionate and awesome, like in the streets. So that was really inspiring for me to, take that photo and do something with it.
It was the first time I saw photos of Asian Americans protesting and in rallies against the war in Vietnam, and it really moved me. And knowing that the people here, especially in the Asian community, stood up against this war, and the courage that they had to do this and the impact it had on my life and my family's life. And just knowing that it changed my life, because it could have gone any other way. If there wasn't that resistance here, the war could have been prolonged and a lot more people could have died. And yeah, so I'm really glad that the Vietnamese people defended their homelands, and that the Asian Americans here and the Japanese Americans really understood that and stood with us and stood to have our voices heard. That yeah, so it was really huge for me to see those photos, and I knew that I wanted to write on that, and I'll probably write more later on that too. But I'm really grateful for that. Thank you.
Because Linda.
So I assume that the photo which inspired me was taken in the early 70s. And in the early 70s, I was the age of those boys that were depicted in the photo. So that set off my riff.
I chose the picture of those manongs kind of in deep conversation about something, because one of my major regrets in my life was never being able to ask my birth father about his history. He came in the early, I think, 30s, and then he went back to the Philippines, and then he immigrated back here in, I think, the 80s. So I think when I write, I'm just trying to recreate like a history that might have happened. And so it's a constant kind of like trying to figure out like what his life could have been like.
I picked a photo that was taken by Eddie Wong, I think, the co-founder of VC, and I got some of the backstory from Abe. I picked it, one, because I recognized, not the street, because it's very different now, but the street sign. So if you take the GO line through Northeast LA, you know what Marmion Way is, because it just runs parallel the train tracks. And the other reason is it's just so full of joy. And I felt like that should be part of the movement story too. That we fight and we do it because it's the right thing to do, but we do it because to find joy. And that's why I picked it. And I thought about displacement too, because if you go to the exhibit, there's a lot of stuff around the anti-eviction struggles, and there's a lot of things around gentrification in Little Tokyo that's happening right now in Chinatown. And I just thought about if in present day, if this, and Highland Park too, Northeast LA too, if this family is displaced, where would they go? And just so ironic that they wouldn't be able to go back to Chinatown. So I saw a play with that.
I chose my image because of its bigness. And within this illustration were moving pictures, a variety of moving pictures. That it was, you've seen these advent cards where you have like the calendar and you open up one window and you open up another window, another window. It was like that. It was amazing. And I think it is true when you get into the business of now how do you teach these kids who don't have ethnic studies in high school? They don't know except what their parents tell them. Well, how do you tell them this? And these images provoke a conversation. These images are loaded with a history that intrigues them and asks them and compels them to ask more. So it's a great gift, that illustration.
Thank you very much. Can we please hear it one more time? We've alluded to the co-founders multiple times over this evening. That's Bob Nakamura, Eddie Wong, Alan Ohashi, and Dwayne Kubo. And I know that I see that Bob is here, and I know Eddie's here. Are Alan and Dwayne here? No? But can we hear it for the co-founders of Visual Communications? Their work, obviously you've seen it tonight, you've seen it in conversation, and if you check out the exhibit, you'll be able to see even more. Their work expands far beyond the reaches of even just visual media. Visual Communications has grown into an organization that reaches across media types and has really impacted the entire, like when we talk about Asian American art today, and we talk about Asian American industry and Asian American film as a whole genre and as a whole community and as a force that is currently seeing this huge surge in Hollywood, that really is, Visual Communications has its fingerprints all over that. So I hope that if you're not familiar with VC, I think many of us are, I hope that you will do a little bit of Googling and learn a little bit about that organization and donate. So with that, I think that we're going to invite you all. I know that you all probably have questions now, but I would invite you to speak to the artists. There is going to be a reception in the lobby, so I would invite you to please meet them out in the lobby, and thank you so much for being here. Big thank you to the Japanese American National Museum. And then he is way in the back in the booth, but can we please hear for Abe Ferrer, who put this all together? His first time putting on a literary event, and I think he did a fine job, so we'll have to enlist him for more things in the future. But thank you so much for joining us. Please get home safely.